LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 30th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. This week I picked out the 10 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. Down in the video description, you can find a link to my clip list for my notes I used for my 10 clips tonight. There are some like 3 still images in there that are also included in the clip list. And then I also have my topic description down there. Tonight's topic, Trump's anti-reality show, having just finished the Republican National Convention. So that means this week we have the former reality show host, President Donald Trump, creating his anti-reality show. And I actually kind of thought, is that title, it's almost an oxymoron, because we all know reality shows aren't real. So is an anti-reality show actually a reality show? I don't know. I thought of that when I titled the video. But anyway, at the Republican National Convention, in my topic this week, the COVID-19 crisis solved in the past. I mean, you even saw Larry Kudlow say that, like, using the past tense, and you saw Trump's big speech with 1,500 people all sitting close together, very few masks. I guess it's all solved, and Trump must have solved it. That was one of the reality show aspects. And then, of course, there's this whole racial reckoning going on. Jacob Blake shot in the back 7 times in Kenosha, Wisconsin, since I did my show last Sunday. Then also in Kenosha, Wisconsin, this 17-year-old came over from Illinois with this big gun and shot 3 people and walked right past the police. And I'll be talking about all that later in the show when I get to the news summaries and the newsmakers. And then there was breaking. Oh, and the thing about all that violence is, in the Trump anti-reality show, that's Biden's America. Everything, when something bad happens, that's happening in Biden's America. It's a cautionary tale for what's going to happen to the United States if Biden wins, even though Biden was never president and hasn't been vice president for the entire Trump term, right? That's Mike Pence. And I may even talk a little bit of Mike Pence along the way. But then there was also this breaking news in the last couple days that Trump's director of national intelligence has told the Congress that he's just going to talk with them in writing now, so they can't ask questions and follow up. And basically it's all about Trump trying to cover up the way Russia is engaging in active measures to get Trump reelected. This came up several weeks ago when the intelligence community tried to come up with this false equivalency that it's somehow, China and Iran are also trying to interfere in our election, or they have a preference, but they're not engaging in these extreme active measures like Vladimir Putin's Russia is doing. And so I guess Trump's trying to cover that up. I'll be covering that with a clip from Adam Schiff. I think that's my first newsmaker clip. But then for political comedy this week, I didn't take anything from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. It's still weeks away from Saturday Night Live. And I actually saw this joke or a few jokes on The Daily Show on Friday. But instead of taking the Daily Show clip, I decided the actual news headline was better than any of the punchlines that they came up with on The Daily Show. This is the actual headline. It's sort of the lighter side of Hurricane Laura here. Hurricane Laura damaged a Lake Charles Confederate monument after parish officials voted to keep it. So yeah, that happened this week. That very little hurricane coverage, like no hurricane coverage, even though there was a huge hurricane hit Louisiana. Well, no, Peter Gaynor, the FEMA administrator, was on with Dana Bash and eventually sort of talked about the hurricane, but actually Dana Bash spent most of the time trying to get him to denounce Donald Trump and his wicked ways. But I don't have any clips from that. I do have several other newsmaker clips. Like I said, I have Adam Schiff. I've got Chad Wolf, a couple Chad Wolfs at the end. The illegal acting Department of Homeland Security Secretary, and I will explain what I mean by illegal if you didn't watch last week when I explained how Chad Wolf is the illegally acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. But before I get to any of those newsmaker clips, I have all 5 news channels had news summaries. The one I think was actually best this week wasn't NBC, but it was CNN's State of the Union. Dana Bash was in for Jake Tapper. The State of the Union this week always bitterly divided. And there were like 2 mistakes in the live version at 6 a.m. Pacific time that they actually edited out when they rebroadcast at 9 a.m. First, at one point, she talks about the guy who was killed in Portland last night. That was another big story. And how he was wearing a hat that was had the logo for this right-wing group, Patriot Prayer, but she says Patriot Payer. So that got edited out later. And then they say they're going to Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, but it turns out to be Adam Schiff. That was a little blooper that got edited out in the later rebroadcast. But why I think that's not why this is the best of the news summaries. It's because this news summary, even though it's shorter than all of the rest of them, it gets all these major stories in. It gets that whole thing about the Director of National Intelligence no longer briefing Congress in person, but just in writing, so can't be questioned. Talks about Kyle Rittenhouse, the guy who shot 3 people in Kenosha and then walked past the police. Talks about Jacob Blake, which doesn't get mentioned in all the news summaries that started the whole sort of resurgence of the George Floyd protests in a lot of places. So all of that gets in here. And, deaths from COVID-19 also gets in this news summary, which doesn't make into all the news summaries for some reason this week. But here's Dana Bash breaking news that they break in without a little introduction. This is Dana Bash's first appearance for State of the Union this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is bitterly divided. With both conventions behind us, it's more clear than ever that this is an election like no other, in the middle of a pandemic that is still not under control. And as the nation comes to a reckoning with racial injustice, protests recharged by the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. And we have breaking news just overnight. Another person was killed near a protest, this time in Portland, Oregon, where demonstrators clashed with pro-Trump ralliers. According to the New York Times, the man who was killed was wearing a hat with a Patriot Prayer insignia and Patriot Prayer insignia, rather, and a far-right group based in Portland. Now, this death comes after 2 people were killed during a protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where a 17-year-old Trump supporter has been charged with those murders. And with less than 10 weeks until November, we have breaking news about the security of the election. Jake Tapper learned that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence will no longer brief Congress in person on election security. It's a move that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff called a, quote, betrayal of the public's right to know how foreign powers are trying to subvert our democracy. I'm going to get straight to the chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Republican Senator Ron Johnson. Whoops, it looks like we have Adam Schiff. Nope, there we go. Adam Schiff is coming up next. But first, we're going to talk to Ron Johnson. It's been one of those mornings. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. First, I want to talk about what happened in Portland. We saw someone get killed overnight.
And I'll show you. I'm actually not going to show you any clips of Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, although he said a lot of ridiculous talking points in favor of Republicans. At one point, he would not condemn. He hemmed and hawed about condemning the shooting by Kyle Rittenhouse of the 3 people that, he's been charged with first-degree murder. And like I said, I'll talk about that a little more when I get to a clip on that later, especially using my background as a criminal defense attorney. I will talk about whether he may have a self-defense case and actually what the additional facts that I personally want to find out about that case before I come to a conclusion. But before I get to any of that, I want to finish my news summaries. The next one is NBC News' Meet the Press, where there was actually no pre-recorded package this morning. You'll see Chuck Todd here starts off with this weird dichotomy saying before we get to the political news, we're going to talk about the clash between the right and the left in Portland, which that seems like political news to me, especially given how politicized it's been. So I don't know why he makes that distinction at the beginning here. Then he goes to Mike Baker, this New York Times columnist, who I actually, before I watched any of the news shows, early this morning, I looked at his whole tweet thread where he kept posting all these videos about how there were, I won't pre-explain everything because Mike Baker, I edit out part of what he says here, but his original explanation of how things got going and how someone ended up shot is included in the news summary, and then I cut out his detailed reporting on what's been going on in Portland for the last month, and then I show the final little news summary, not a pre-recorded package. It does talk about Jacob Blake. It does talk about Kyle Rittenhouse. It talks a little bit about the anti-reality show at the Trump Republican National Convention. Not that much about COVID, but anyway, I'll talk about the NBC News Meet the Press news summary after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. We're going to get to all the political news in a moment. We're going to start with a deadly clash in Portland, Oregon. Pro-Trump and counter-protesters clashed there overnight. Fistfights broke out, and at one point, gunfire erupted during a confrontation, and a man was killed. Joining me now is Mike Baker of the New York Times, who has been covering these events in Portland. So, Mike, tell us what you saw, what you witnessed, and if you can, who shot this individual?
Yeah, so, last night there was a huge gathering of Trump supporters out in the suburbs of Portland, and they had this vow that they were going to go into Portland waving flags as sort of a caravan. And initially the plan was to sort of circle around the highways, but some of the people in the caravan peeled off and went right into downtown, where there were a whole large crowd of counter-protesters there ready to confront them. And so we saw fist fights on the streets in some cases, people in the backs of pickup trucks shooting paintballs into the crowd, other people throwing things back onto the trucks where the pro-Trump supporters were there driving around. And then eventually there was a smaller conflict on the streets where someone was shot. And it looks right now like the person who was shot had a hat with the insignia of the group Patriot Prayer, which is a right-wing group here in the Portland area.
Well, the events in Portland came at the end of a volatile week in this country, one that began with the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the shooting deaths of 2 protesters in Kenosha by a teenage vigilante who came in from out of state, and of course the Republican National Convention. President Trump and other speakers presented a far different picture of an America than Democrats did a week earlier. Not one in which President Trump was responsible for mishandling the coronavirus and tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths, but instead one in which the virus is largely a thing of the past, the president having saved millions of lives with a swift response, and the violence in the streets a sign of what will happen in a Joe Biden presidency. Joining me now is the...
And I will have a clip of Chuck Todd talking to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who you saw there at the end, asking him about this weird idea that all the bad violence happening under Trump's presidency in a few cities around the country is actually happening in Joe Biden's America, and you'll see them go back and forth on that. And I think there's one good cross-examination and then one, well, actually there's this one sort of jump to conclusion cross-examination and then one failure at the end. When I get to the Mark Meadows clip, that's clip number 7. But if you're following along on the clip list, I mentioned that the clip list was down there. Did I mention that that Daily Advertiser story about the Confederate statue being toppled by Hurricane Laura? There's a link to that down in the video description. The source of all my clips there are links down in the video description for that. And I think I pretty much pre-criticized everything I wanted to pre-criticize in that NBC News Meet the Press news summary. Did I miss anything? I'm sure you'll let me know down in the comment section. But the next news summary, ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They have their chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, in guest hosting this week. And he stresses something that a lot of people, and you'll see this also in some of the other coverage, that the different thing about this election is that both sides are saying if the other guy loses, it's like the end of America. I've seen a lot of pundits stressing that, and Jonathan Karl makes that point. He does talk about the 1,000 people dying every day still from COVID. And anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch that 2-minute news summary from Jonathan Karl on ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. Every 4 years, Americans come together to make a choice. We expect hard-fought campaigns, and we expect politicians telling us this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But with the conventions that just played out, we saw something different. Democrats told us if the other side wins, our democracy is over. Republicans said if the other side wins, America is over. Both suggesting an apocalypse if they don't prevail on November 3rd. In the visuals of this week's Republican convention, we saw the world as Donald Trump wants it to be. His name in fireworks over the Washington skyline. The White House South Lawn transformed into a celebration of all things Trump. And his supporters shoulder to shoulder as if the pandemic had never happened and isn't still killing about 1,000 Americans a day. On the streets outside, protesters offered their own visual reminder of the number unmentioned on the South Lawn. More than 180,000 Americans killed by COVID-19. When it was over, some of those protests turned ugly. Trump supporters taunted and threatened on their way out. And last night, more violence in Portland. Clashes between protesters and Trump supporters, one person shot dead. Images Republicans are sure to point to as a precursor to life after a Biden victory. And at the Lincoln Memorial Friday, marchers, in the footsteps of Dr. King, called for action to address a subject barely mentioned at the Republican convention: persistent racial injustice, after yet another black man was shot by a white police officer. Jacob Blake shot in the back 7 times. The president went almost a full week without commenting, but now says, quote, "I don't like the sight of it." Joining me now, Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf.
Should be illegally acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf, but I'll get to that later those are my last 2 news clips, are Chad Wolf news clips, before I get to the bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip at the end of the show for those waiting for that. But the thing about that, I think he did mention Jacob Blake. I don't think there was Kyle, the 17-year-old guy from Illinois who came down to Kenosha and shot 3 people, killing 2, Kyle Rittenhouse. I don't think he was mentioned by Jonathan Karl. Did I miss it? Let me know if I missed it. But there was a definite dramatization of the Trump anti-reality show there, the Trump RNC convention speech versus the 180,000 dead that were being dramatized by protesters on the streets of D.C. and all the people crowded together as if COVID-19 never happened, watching Trump's speech. And anyway, other than, I think, Kyle Rittenhouse being missing from that news summary. That was pretty good. Margaret Brennan here on... was there... I think they didn't mention the DNI thing, Trump trying to use his presidential powers to cover up how Russia is trying to interfere in the 2020 election to help him get reelected. I don't think that shows up in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, although Margaret Brennan did bring it up later in the program. I can't remember if Jonathan Karl did or not. Here's Margaret Brennan talking about how things are grim this Sunday with all the stuff going on, and talking about the protests and the COVID cases, the number of COVID cases and deaths, before going to Mark Strassman, who is back in Atlanta. I don't know if that means he's still waiting for an interview from someone from the CDC. Remember, several weeks ago, they mentioned on CBS News' Face the Nation that Mark Strassman's been reporting from Atlanta for all these weeks because he keeps asking every week for an interview from someone from the CDC, and he can't get one. I don't know if that's what that's about. In this CBS News Face the Nation news summary, they kind of gloss over what's going on in Portland to make it seem like the guy who got shot was shot in clashes, in the big clashes between Black Lives Matter protesters and pro-Trump protesters, when it was actually kind of off on the side. It wasn't like part of the main event. And something else, they talk about the NBA and the sports teams that decided not to play because of the shooting of Jacob Blake. But they use the word boycott and then later work stoppage. And boycott is not an accurate term. It's actually more like a wildcat strike. And it shows how, one of the few members of the labor movement that still have power are the high-profile sports figures who decided to engage in this wildcat strike. That's covered in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, Margaret Brennan, and then Mark Strassman, and I'll talk about it a little more after. This is the longest news summary. I think it's missing a couple things, which I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. It is another grim Sunday morning here in Washington in the aftermath of protests at Black Lives Matter Plaza just down the street from us here at CBS, as well as in other cities across the country. This as the number of corona cases worldwide passed the 25 million mark. Almost a quarter of those cases are here in the U.S. The death toll is near 183,000. We begin this morning with CBS News national correspondent Mark Strassman in Atlanta, Georgia.
Chaos overnight in Washington, D.C., 1 block from the White House. Police waving steel batons cleared out a couple hundred Black Lives Matter protesters. They also fired tear gas and flashbang grenades to get people moving. The clashes were among the worst seen here in the last couple months. More confrontation across the country in Portland, Oregon. A caravan of Trump supporters drove downtown and scuffled with protesters. Get back in your car, hold the flag out, what you gonna do? Suddenly, gunfire. A man lay dead in the street, shot in the chest. Police say the hat he wore represented a far-right group. They've battled before with protesters here who have gathered nightly for months.
And thank you, Portland cops, for not doing a damn thing. No justice, no peace.
And this is Kenosha, Wisconsin, at the intersection of injustice and outrage. It's not on a GPS. You have to feel it to find it, like these protesters. They marched again this weekend because Jacob Blake may never walk again. A week ago, his 3 children screamed as a white police officer shot him 7 times in the back.
What gave them the right to think that my son was an animal?
Blake's father addressed protesters.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this. No justice. No justice. And we're not going to stop
Giannis takes the three and hits it.
Back in action this weekend, NBA playoff games. After the Kenosha shooting, players began boycotting to protest issues of social justice. Work stoppages spread across the WNBA, Major League Soccer, and Major League Baseball before games resumed. Dodgers superstar Mookie Betts.
There's a lot going on in the world and change needs to be made.
America's other ongoing crisis is COVID, also still in search of needed change. Nationally, new cases and deaths are generally falling. But the new health worry is in Midwest and Upper Plains states, where new cases are rising. And the CDC stumbled again this week. Its revised guidance suggested limiting testing to patients who show viral symptoms. Public health experts pounced. 40% of people with COVID show no symptoms and can spread the virus. Director Robert Redfield later said anyone exposed to the virus can get tested. And with schools from kindergarten to college reopening across the country, health experts expect another COVID spike. Sometime in the next 3 weeks, America's official COVID death toll will top 200,000 people. Just like those protesters, the virus shows no sign of disappearing. Margaret?
Mark Strassman in it.
And Mark Strassman did some extra good writing in that story there. He had some good flowery language. I don't know what you would call it, but and saying that in the next few weeks we're going to get 200,000 cases. That's before the Trump-Biden debate that's scheduled for September 29th. And if you go back through my Sunday Live clip roundups, you'll remember seeing Trump saying, "Oh, we're going to be below 100,000, maybe even 60,000." And, I should go dig up some of those clips. But the fact that we're going to be at 200,000 dead Americans from COVID-19 under the Trump presidency, that's one of the things that I think is really strongly driving Trump's bad numbers that are stopping him from being reelected. That's one of the strong points that Democrats should focus on. Trump's failure on COVID-19, despite all the anti-reality stuff you saw in the anti-reality show at the Republican National Convention, and then just the lack of health care. Trump said he would solve health care. It would be so easy, and there'd be something so much better than Obamacare, and that never happened. And actually, later I'm going to show you a clip of Trump saying that he was going to get safety in a follow-up question in one of the newsmaker interviews. But before I get to that, I have to get to the last news summary, although it's not really from a news organization. This is the Fox News Sunday Fox News news summary. And if you read this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, you'll know that Fox News was created as a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party by Roger Ailes, not as a news organization, although sometimes some journalism does occur there incidentally, and Chris Wallace does kind of engage in some journalism in a clip number 8 I'm going to show you, although I will also show you some problems with that clip and some problems with what Fox News did later in their news program after clip 8. But this is clip 5, the Fox News Sunday news summary, which what I find most interesting about this is that they've added on a second reporter. They've got David Spunt giving the Trump reality show or anti-reality show, and then they have Jacqui Heinrich giving sort of covering the Biden campaign for the alternative view. Although you'll notice in Jacqui Heinrich's report, they still sort of slip in some of the Trump talking points, but I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch this last and longest news summary, if you can call it news, from Fox News, together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. It's now just 65 days, 9 weeks till Election Day. And the first debate between President Trump and Joe Biden is less than a month away. With the president officially accepting his renomination, this long campaign is finally entering the intense home stretch. In a moment, we'll talk with top officials from both campaigns about where the race stands as we head into September. But we begin with Fox team coverage. David Spunt at the White House and Jacqui Heinrich in Wilmington, Delaware. Let's start with the latest on the president's post-convention strategy. David.
Chris, as we close in on the 2-month mark until the election, the president is waging war, and it's not just against Joe Biden.
Joe Biden is the puppet of the radical left movement that seeks to obliterate and destroy everything that you hold dear.
In 2020, the race for president is more than just a difference of opinion. Ask President Trump, and it's a fight between good versus evil.
We're not going to let our country be destroyed by a bunch of nut jobs.
The president back on the campaign trail less than 24 hours after giving his acceptance speech on the South Lawn of the White House. At a Friday night rally in New Hampshire, the president blamed Democrats for the violence plaguing U.S. cities.
The puppet Biden wants you to cancel weddings, funerals, and school, but has no problem with thousands of so-called peaceful protesters cramming into your streets, mugging people, hurting people.
It's all about replicating a winning strategy from 2016 when the campaign portrayed the country at risk from immigrants flooding the border. This election, it's about dangerous cities. The president drove that point home on Saturday during an official visit to Texas and Louisiana to tour the aftermath of Hurricane Lara.
The people in Portland should protest because the mayor doesn't know what he's doing. He has no clue.
And happening overnight, more chaos in Portland as a caravan of Black Lives Matter and supporters of the president clashed. One person shot and killed. The president plans to visit Kenosha, Wisconsin on Tuesday, another site of recent unrest. Chris?
David Spunt reporting from the White House. David, thanks. Now let's turn to Jacqui Heinrich, who's covering the Biden campaign. Jacqui.
Chris, resuming travel to swing states after Labor Day, the Biden campaign continues to make this election about coronavirus and how the Trump administration mishandled it. But simmering turmoil in Kenosha threatens to derail that strategy. Former Vice President Joe Biden is clear about where he stands on police brutality and protests over it.
Once again, a black man, Jacob Blake, has been shot by the police in broad daylight, with the whole world watching.
And his running mate stepped even further following progressive criticism over her law enforcement record.
Based on what I've seen, it seems that the officer should be charged.
But as Republicans repeat false claims Biden wants to defund police and warn violence and crime will spread,
You won't be safe in Joe Biden's America.
Biden will need to speak to swing voters in the mostly white, working-class, rural districts President Trump won in 2016, some of whom are in Kenosha, torn apart after protests over the police shooting of Jacob Blake. Biden condemned the violence, accusing Republicans of using unrest for political gain.
To prove that you should be scared of Joe Biden, they're pointing to what's happening in Donald Trump's America?
But he hasn't committed to visiting Kenosha, despite planned visits to 4 swing states, including Wisconsin. Both Biden and Harris spoke to Blake's family.
They were so comforting that you almost forgot how the situation was really playing out.
Biden's campaign said upcoming travel will follow public health guidelines, meaning we should see small roundtables, certainly no rallies, although the drive-in watch party from the DNC could become a model for bigger events. Chris.
Jacqui, thank you. Joining us now, Trump.
So you see, Jacob Blake and COVID-19 didn't really come up until Jacqui Heinrich's report there at the end about the Biden campaign, and it was all politicized, and we saw in Jacqui Heinrich's report that she was saying how Biden had planned to campaign on Trump's response to COVID-19, but that's being derailed by the unrest in Kenosha, and mentions Jacob Blake, although not Kyle Rittenhouse. And I see that's like the big topic down in the live comments during my live stream. I've been reading those along the way. Oh, and I also wanted to, in addition to reading all the arguments in the live comments, I can't read them all, but I read some of them while I'm watching the clips with you. I saw that Matthew gave me a $4.99 contribution with the first two words I usually start my show with. So welcome. So welcome to Matthew, and thank you for that. And then Sexy Bob also gave me a $5 contribution. Vote for Biden, Harris, vote Democrat, down ballot. That is the best way to ensure the end of Trumpism, if that's something that you want to end, something that I've been talking about, the need to end. It's not even Republicanism, it's Trumpism that must be ended. So I appreciate the Super Chat contributions, especially on a week like this when I'm talking about police violence in Portland and Kenosha. The chances of my video being demonetized are significantly higher, so I appreciate getting support in the Super Chat. But regarding whether Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty of murder or whether he has a good self-defense, the thing is, I've seen a lot of video of the second and third people he shot, and I don't have a lot of information about the first person he shot. And a lot of the argument is about person 2 and 3, and those are people. What they're saying with the supposed narrative from the prosecutors, and as a former criminal defense attorney, I never accept on good faith what the prosecutors are saying, but they've charged him with murder, saying that he shot one person and then people tried to chase him down because he had shot someone, and the second two people he shot, they were coming after him, but they were coming after him because he shot person number 1. And if that's true, you don't get self-defense as an argument to defend yourself against people who are trying to stop you after you shot someone. But the thing is, I don't have a lot of information about the first person Kyle Rittenhouse shot, person number 1. I don't know really what the circumstances were there, and that's really critical. And one thing you have to really remember is whether he can use self-defense as a defense against first-degree murder. That means the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he didn't act in self-defense. So this is kind of like the George Zimmerman case, where just because he's found not guilty of murder because the state didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he didn't act in self-defense, that doesn't mean he's innocent. I mean, I've seen people down in the live comments talking about how he was 17 years old. He couldn't legally possess that big gun he had. He went across state lines. He was engaging in vigilante justice, protecting businesses he had no connection to. I mean, it's almost like he went down there because he wanted to shoot somebody. I don't know. But like I said, we need more information, and especially about the first person who got shot, because that has a lot of impact on whether he was defending himself against people chasing him down because he shot someone. And so I'm waiting to get more information about that, and I don't know if that clears up the arguments down in the comment section or if it just instigates more arguments, but I promised earlier I would commit some legal analysis based on my background as a criminal defense attorney. And so, I want to get all the facts before I decide if someone is guilty of first-degree murder. And right now, I'm not saying Kyle Rittenhouse isn't guilty. I'm just saying I need some more facts before I can come to my personal conclusion. So, having said that, I want to move on now to the newsmaker clips. The first one is Adam Schiff talking about something you didn't hear about anywhere on Fox News Sunday. That was one of the criticisms I forgot to make before I showed it, because I usually totally pre-criticize the clips. But this is the breaking story about how the Trump administration is trying to hide the fact that Russia is working to help Trump get reelected. and Adam Schiff talks about that with Dana Bash. He starts off, he's reacting to what Ron Johnson of Wisconsin said, and like I said, I didn't take a clip of that, but then he gets into what this whole story is about, and it goes on for about 3 minutes with Dana Bash, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
But as you point out, what the administration is saying makes no sense in terms of their refusal to brief Congress on Russian interference designed to help the Trump campaign. They're going to put it in writing now instead of give us an oral briefing. That doesn't make any sense unless the goal is not to allow members of Congress, the representatives of the American people, to ask questions, to point out the false equivalence that the administration is trying to promulgate, that somehow Russian interference in our election, Russian active measures to try to decide our election and help Donald Trump is no different than other countries are doing. They don't want those questions answered. They don't want that information going to the public. This is what the president is after. After all, Donald Trump fired Director McGuire for briefing Congress on the fact that Russia was trying to help his campaign again. So this president doesn't want to push back on that. He doesn't want the American people to know about it. He doesn't want to hear about Russian bounties on the heads of our troops. He doesn't want to hear about Russian convoys colliding with American forces in Syria. And he sure as heck doesn't want the American people to know it either.
So, Mr. Chairman, as you know, the DNI, Radcliffe says his office is going to provide your committee with written reports. Why is that not enough? Because you can make a written report and you can say things in a written report that are not correct, and you can't be subject to questioning about it. This is the problem we've had. For example, Dana, we saw about a month ago the head of the intelligence community, his director of national counterintelligence, Bill Evanina, issue a public statement that drew a false equivalence between what Russia was doing and what China and Iran are doing. And he was called out on it. And we had hearings in the Congress where he could be held to account, and others could as well. And the result, Dana, was they were forced to issue a second statement that acknowledged, no, Russia is actually intervening to help Donald Trump and denigrate Joe Biden. China has a preference. And being able to call them out, hold them accountable, have them testify before Congress, place them under oath if necessary, forces accountability. When you can hide behind documents or withhold documents and not have to answer questions about it, it lets you conceal the truth. And in this case, concealing the truth is concealing Russians are again intervening to help the president in his reelection. The president evidently believes that he can't beat Joe Biden without getting either foreign help or disenfranchising people from voting during a pandemic, and doesn't want the country to know about it. So are you suggesting that the Trump administration is trying to protect Russia here? President Trump's motivation is, as always, solely about himself. It's to get himself reelected. And he realizes if the... So, that's Adam Schiff continuing his arguments that you saw in the impeachment of Donald Trump, that, all you can expect Trump to do is what is in Trump's best interest. He will do anything he needs to do. He's a malignant narcissist. He's, I don't know. I think one of the things that may happen, Trump might get reelected with the help of Vladimir Putin and Russia, just like he did in 2016, because he has all these ties to Russia that you can see, if you read this book here, Russian Roulette, right over my left shoulder. There's so much good information right behind me that backs up everything I'm saying every week. That's why I have all these books behind me, just so, it's not just superficial punditry and opinionating. There is huge amounts of research and facts behind everything I say, and it's all behind me on my bookshelf. Don't believe me? Just read all these books. But, Adam Schiff, I was about to say is, there's one timeline where
Trump gets reelected with the help of Vladimir Putin, but there's another timeline where Biden becomes president, Kamala Harris becomes vice president, and all of a sudden there's an opening in California. Gavin Newsom has to appoint someone to be California's next senator. Adam Schiff. I have several good choices, but Adam Schiff is one of them. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. If sometime in 2021 we're going to get past this Trump nightmare, Joe Biden will be president, Kamala Harris will be vice president, and Adam Schiff will be the newest California senator. As old as he is, he'll be a fresh young face compared to the other California senator, Dianne Feinstein. But I want to get to the next newsmaker clip. This is from NBC News' Meet the Press. Chuck Todd cross-examining Mark Meadows, the White House Chief of Staff. He only came to meet the press this week, and Chuck Todd asked the obvious question about Trump's big argument that all this unrest in certain American cities is a slice of Biden's America when it's actually happening in Trump's America. And at one point, Mark Meadows says that, well, you know, most of Trump's America is peaceful. It's just this place where there are Democratic mayors. And Chuck Todd pounces on that. You're saying that all of America isn't Trump's America, which actually isn't what Mark Meadows said. And then at the end of this clip, you'll see Mark Meadows says, well, Trump's the president who doesn't want to defund the police, kind of implying that Joe Biden wants to defund the police, which of course he has never said, but Chuck Todd doesn't cross-examine on that fact, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch Chuck Todd's cross-examination of Mark Meadows, such as it is in this clip.
I wanted to start with this. The president on Thursday night painted a picture of what he said would be Joe Biden's America, and I look at the violence this week, Mr. Meadows. This is in Donald Trump's America. How much responsibility should voters be giving the president for his inability to keep the streets safe?
Well, I mean, you can try to reframe it that way, Chuck, but that's just not accurate. I can tell you that when we look at Kenosha, in the phone calls that were made to the governor of Wisconsin, we offered help. Help was denied. Obviously, there was multiple gunshots and people lost their life. We made a repeated call then the next day, sent in National Guard, FBI agents, U.S. Marshals to restore peace in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And that's what needs to happen in Portland. You know, it's interesting to see you frame Portland that way. After 94 days, perhaps now we're going to act because someone was shot last night, but to suggest that somehow it's been peaceful in Portland, Chuck, is just not looking at the facts. We've had over 200 anarchists, and they're not peaceful protesters. These are people that every single night conduct violent acts, and it is in Democrat cities. You know, you want to talk about Donald Trump's America. Most of Donald Trump's America is peaceful. It is a Democrat-led city in Portland that we're talking about this morning, who just yesterday denied help once again from the federal government. And so, listen, we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to make sure that we hold people accountable. Right. And ultimately, we need to make sure that these people that are conducting these acts go to jail. We've had over 97 federal law enforcement arrests that were conducted in Portland, but largely the DA there in Portland, Chuck, you know, he says even if you accost a police officer, we're not going to enforce that. It's just not what most Americans believe should be happening in our cities.
You made an interesting comparison. I guess you're saying that is there parts of the country that the president doesn't govern? I mean, is the president only in charge of just where places where he has supporters? You sort of leveled a weird charge. You're saying, well, these are all Democratic cities. I'm just trying to understand. Does the president not believe he has responsibility of governing and leading the entire country?
Well, he does govern and lead the entire country, but Chuck, you're smarter than that. These are local law enforcement efforts that can be supported by a federal backstop, whether it be National Guard or the FBI. And so when we look at that, as we look in Portland, it's not Donald Trump's DA that's saying to stand down. It's not Donald Trump that is saying that we need to look the other way. It's the mayor of Portland. So let's at least have a true version of what's happening in these cities. You know, if your viewers are going to tune in this morning, why don't you show them the letter from the mayor of Portland where he says no thanks for federal help, and yet we have someone who lost their life overnight. I can tell you that we are ready. In fact, the president is ready to make sure that we provide whatever law enforcement and support that we can. And it's not this president who has said, let's defund the police, Chuck.
Let me ask you this. If the president is cheering on people that are going to go into Portland.
And, you know, that's a good question from Chuck Todd. And I'll show Chad Wolf being asked about that later, about how Donald Trump he tweeted early this morning, you know, that the people who went into Portland and fired all those paintballs at the Black Lives Matter activists from their Trump MAGA pickup trucks, that they were great patriots, you know, and Chuck Todd does ask Mark Meadows about that in the follow-up question there, but that last thing Mark Meadows said about, you know, Trump isn't the president who wants to defund the police, was that an implication that Biden has embraced defunding the police? I think it kind of was, and Chuck Todd didn't ask about that, which I criticized him for before I showed the clip. But anyway, you can let me know what you think about that Chuck Todd cross-examination of Mark Meadows. And the next newsmaker clip is actually Lara Trump appearing on Fox News Sunday. They had Lara Trump and then a spokesperson for the Biden campaign. And this is a clip of Chris Wallace over on Fox News Sunday sort of cross-examining Lara Trump as a senior advisor to the Trump campaign, which I guess means that actually means she's Eric Trump's wife. Is that what it means to be a senior advisor? You're just like the wife of one of Trump's children? Anyway, and she spoke at the convention, and anyway, you'll see Chris Wallace here cross-examining her on whether you can blame Biden for violence in the cities. And the one thing I want to give kudos to Chris Wallace here is that he plays a clip from Fox and Friends, one of the most biased programs in the universe, I guess, where Kellyanne Conway, if you watched my live stream last week, I talked about the breaking news that Kellyanne Conway and her husband, George Conway, are leaving public life and focusing on their family. I don't know what that's all about, but Kellyanne Conway was on Fox and Friends and said, you know, Trump benefits from all the violence in the cities. It's good for Trump if there's violence in Democrat-run cities. And that's the follow-up question that Chris Wallace asks to Lara Trump after asking her to respond to a clip of Biden refuting the whole Biden's America talking point from the Trump campaign in this clip.
All right, both you and the president talked at the convention about the violence, the surge of violence, whether it's protests or crime in our streets, and both of you blamed the violence on the continuing, as you said, weak response by Democratic politicians. Here was Joe Biden's response to that.
He's rooting for more violence, not less, and it's clear about that. And what's he doing? He's kept pouring gasoline on the fire. This happens to be Donald Trump's America.
Now, obviously, nobody wants to see violence in American streets, but as a practical matter, does the president, does his campaign think that this violence in the streets plays to the president's political advantage in the campaign?
Well, that is never something that any of us would want to see happen. Absolutely not. I think, unfortunately, it looks really bad, specifically for Joe Biden and the Biden campaign, because, Chris, you might remember that it took him about 3 months to finally come out and condemn this violence and say that people should stop doing it. The president from day one has been saying this, and I'll reiterate what I just said in my last answer to you, which is that the president has said, I have federal resources available to every mayor in every city across this country. We don't want violence in our streets. We want to keep people safe. If you don't have safety in your communities, what do you have? Nothing else matters. So I would put the onus on Joe Biden and say it took him a little bit too long to come out and say that this wasn't a problem. And I think it's probably because he knows that that is his base and he doesn't want to upset these people. And so, you know what? I think it looks a lot worse for him.
Well, let's talk about the political implications, because here's what Kellyanne Conway had to say on this subject this week. Take a look.
There was a quote today from a restaurateur in Wisconsin saying, "Are you protesters trying to get Donald Trump reelected? He knows, full stop, and I guess Mayor Pete knows, full stop, that the more chaos and anarchy and vandalism and violence reigns, the better it is for the very clear choice on who's best on public safety and law and order."
The better it is, she said, the more violence in the streets, the clearer the choice for voters on the issue of law and order.
Yeah, well, I think it certainly paints a very clear picture. Look, what did we see after the convention wrapped the other night when people were leaving the White House, Chris? We saw that it was, this anarchist mob that was attacking Trump supporters, attacking Republicans, yet you didn't see that happening on the other side. There was an opportunity at the end of the Democrats convention where we could have had people attacking their folks, but that would never happen. It only goes one way. So if there's one person in that crowd that for a second thought, you know what, maybe I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, maybe I'm going to vote for the Democrats, I bet their mind was changed very quickly. The people that you see, by the way, getting accosted and harassed at restaurants around Washington, D.C., I understand that one of those women, was marching in the previous weeks with the BLM protests. I wonder what she wants to do now as she heads towards November 3rd. I think the point is that the more this happens to people and the more they see that this is a mob that in effect has been supported, and it really has monetarily been supported by bailing out, these violent criminals from folks in the Biden campaign, people wonder, why would I vote for this? Why would I want to see this continue in America? I don't think they do, and I think they know President Donald Trump is the person that has been saying this has to stop from day one, and he wants to see it stop all around this country.
All right, let's talk about the fall campaign, because...
So you can see there, Chris Wallace didn't do any more follow-up cross-examination. He did show the clip of Biden saying it's Trump's America, not Biden's America, where all this violence and unrest is occurring, and although not really put in the context of Trump saying it was Biden's America where the unrest was occurring. But there was some good cross-examination there, though Chris Wallace had Lara Trump on and then also had someone from the Biden campaign on, and one additional piece of Fox News bias I wanted to point out before I get to the final two news clips from illegally acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf. I want to point out that when Chris Wallace cross-examined the Biden campaign representative, he mentioned this poll from the Washington Post and ABC that said that among white suburban voters, 42% think Biden will make us less safe, while 22% say Biden will make us more safe. So that makes you think that suburban voters are being convinced that Biden is going to make them less safe. Well, I actually looked at that Washington Post ABC poll, and I looked at all the crosstabs and internals, and I've actually put a link down in the video description to the crosstabs. And if you look at the crosstabs they don't actually say white suburban anywhere. Maybe Fox News has access to that data, but the closest they come is what I've highlighted in blue here. The suburban voters say 27% think if Biden were president, they would feel more safe in terms of crime. And worse is 35%, but about the same is also 35%, with like 3% not sure. And if you look at what Fox News showed you, they didn't show you the about the same, which is like 35%. I don't know where they got white suburban voters from, but assuming like 35% are saying about the same, that means like 57% are saying that it's about the same, or even if it's 50, like a majority of the people answering the poll are saying a Biden presidency would make us more safe or about the same. But you can see how Fox News made it seem like most people think Biden will make us less safe, when the opposite is true. So, and I put there's a link down in the video description to the, like I said, the ABC News, Washington Post crosstabs Google sheet. You can see for yourself. But anyway, I want to get to the last two news clips. Both Chad Wolf, the illegally acting Secretary of Homeland Security. I say illegally acting because a court has found his appointment was illegal, and now Trump has actually nominated him to be Senate approved, like that's really going to happen. But the point is, he's a Trump administration partisan tool who is lying in the second clip and just forwarding Trump talking points in this next clip. This is Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation asking Chad Wolf about these. There was a tweet early this morning where Trump was saying, like, great patriots to the Trump supporters in Portland who decided to get into a big conflict with the Black Lives Matter supporters, and this Patriot Prayer guy was shot by someone who has, at least at the time of this broadcast, not yet been identified. But anyway, here's Margaret Brennan talking to the illegally acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, in this clip.
I want to ask you about what is going on in Portland overnight. We saw a man there killed during dueling demonstrations between a pro-Trump caravan and Black Lives Matter activists. Given the situation, which seems very tense, will the Trump administration ask for everyone, including those pro-Trump supporters, to pull back?
Well, we've been asking Portland to do their job really for over 3 months now. What you see in Portland is an environment. They foster an environment. They foster an environment of this lawlessness and chaos. We've been asking the governor and others to send in the National Guard to address the violence so that you don't have dueling demonstrations. You don't have this violence that occurs night after night after night on the streets of Portland. So we need them to do their job. We need them to step up, and if they can't or they don't have the ability or the resources, ask the federal government. We'll provide those resources as we've done in Wisconsin and others so that we can address any violence across the spectrum.
But I hear what you're saying, but the president has tweeted about Portland 12 times in the past 48 hours, including retweeting a video of his supporters, people with Trump flags flying, driving into Portland, and he called them great patriots. Doesn't that heighten tension when you say you're trying to lower it?
Absolutely not. I think what we see in Portland and various other cities
endorse this as the president appears to be doing?
Local officials not doing their job and protecting the people of those communities. And what we've seen in Portland is almost 3 months of allowing individuals to come in night after night and set fire to government buildings with little to no consequences. So are you saying that the local officials have failed to stop the Trump supporters from driving into Portland? Because the president seems to be endorsing them doing so. They have failed to protect their communities, specifically in Portland. And we've seen that. We have over 90 arrests, 74 different criminal citations that the FBI is pursuing against individuals. We need Portland to step up, bring this violence to a close, and I think you'll see a lot of this go away.
Okay, it sounds then like you're asking Portland officials to crack down on the Trump supporters too. If that's not what you mean, please clarify. The president said... Go ahead, sorry.
I'm asking Portland officials, so that's the mayor, that's the governor, and that's local law enforcement, to do their job to address any violent activity that is occurring in their streets. As soon as they do that, again, we'll see that as we've seen in Wisconsin and other places. We'll see the violence go down to almost zero, and this will address the issue that Portland has been dealing with for 3 months, that the citizens in Portland have been dealing with for over 3 months. It's time to end the lawlessness and the chaos that we see in Portland.
The president said Friday at his New Hampshire rally.
So you saw Chad Wolf there get a fairly good cross-examination from Margaret Brennan, but still blaming the Democrats and the mayor of Portland and the Democrats in Portland for not being strong enough against the protesters, even though, well, I don't want to do any more criticism, media criticism and political commentary than what I said before I showed the clip. But the final Chad Wolf clip I want to show is back on the main topic of the Trump reality show. One of the weird things that happened during the Republican National Convention was they showed this video of Trump naturalizing several people to become U.S. citizens. One thing you never heard mentioned in any of the news summaries or the previous clips, and I don't think it was mentioned once on any of the news analysis shows this morning, was the Hatch Act, which says that, it exempts the president and the vice president, but anyone else who works for the executive branch is not supposed to use any of their time during working hours to promote a political campaign. And one of the things that happened during the Republican National Convention was they showed this naturalization ceremony where apparently all the people being naturalized, becoming citizens of the United States did not know that they were going to be used as props in the Republican National Convention. And in this last clip, Jonathan Karl asks Chad Wolf, the Department of Homeland Security illegally acting secretary, if he knew beforehand that he was violating the Hatch Act and he was going to be used by Trump to promote the Republican National Convention with this naturalization ceremony. And I think he lies by the end of this clip with the final newsmaker clip for my Sunday live clip roundup, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
I want to turn to your role in the convention. You obviously took part in that naturalization ceremony that was played in a video at the convention. Did you know when you were there for that naturalization ceremony at the White House with the president that it was going to be played that night at the convention?
Again, naturalization ceremonies are what the department does. We do hundreds, if not thousands of them every year. I've participated in several of them, not only with the president, but with the vice president. So it's absolutely a legitimate role for the department to do. Again, we do them across the nation. I did one in Denver the day after on Wednesday of this past week, and we'll continue to do that. That was an official event at the White House. It was uploaded to a public YouTube channel. Anyone, any individual, organization, or political party can pull down that video and do with it as they wish. So again,
sir,
legitimate
but sir, respectfully, that was not my question. My question was, did you know when you took part in that ceremony that it was going to be used that night at the Republican convention?
No, what I knew is, again, participating in a naturalization ceremony. We had a number of USCIS employees there, as they do every naturalization ceremony, making sure that that ceremony goes off without a hitch, that we're giving that oath of allegiance to those individuals there. And again, we'll continue to do that because that's our mission at the department.
Okay, finally, a story that broke.
So what do you think? Did Chad Wolf lie in that last clip? When he said the word no, he's like, no, what I knew was that this was totally legal because we talked to our lawyers and they said if we did this and uploaded it to our YouTube channel, then the RNC could use it and it wasn't illegal. It didn't violate the Hatch Act. But the word no there, I think, was a lie because he did know about it beforehand. It was a big plan, and whatever. If you disagree with me, let me know down in the comment section. That was my last newsmaker clip, but I did promise that I would have a Dash and Sandy clip before I finish the show. This was earlier today. I got Sandy, the dog, coming in the door to the... By the way, hold on. I want to point out that... as I was mentioning last week, here in Sacramento, I am still experiencing really bad quality air. Come on, I'm trying to transfer it from my phone to my laptop here. Come on. Well, there it goes. So, what I was trying to say is, if you're wondering what part of Sacramento I live in, it's the part of Sacramento that has this big red spot over it. That means that your air is unhealthy. Sorry, I didn't enlarge that enough. I was having problems importing it. But yeah, that is why my eyes, my nose, my throat are all like irritated, because I'm living near these wildfires that, I shouldn't even be complaining because people have died, people have been burned out of their homes, but a lot of California is just dealing with bad air, and I don't know why that doesn't get covered in the corporate news outlets. But Before I finish, here is the Dash and Sandy clip. This is Sandy coming inside from through my door over there and then interacting with the cat Dash before I finish the show. Here you go.
You recently participated in a virtual meeting with her mother, setting aside your jersey and your leadership role here. What does it mean to you personally, as a black woman in America, to be so involved in?
And there you go, the final clip of the night. All the news clips, the Dash and Sandy clip, took me 10 hours at least to put the show together here. I hope you appreciate it. I appreciate all of my live viewers, the super chat contributions. If you want to help support the show, there are links down in the video description for direct PayPal contributions. Become a monthly supporter on Patreon. There's a join button down there for the YouTube people to become a YouTube member. Otherwise, join me next week and every week. I saw someone last week said just 9 more weeks until the election, 9 more weeks of LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup. No, I will keep doing the show until at least January 20th, 2021, because if Trump loses, the time between November 4th and January 20th, that might be the most critical time in American history. Who knows? But anyway, if you want to find out, keep joining me every Sunday, and until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.